Okay, Deputy Murphy.
Thank you, and good afternoon. Can I just ask you about, just go to your opening statement, and you just on the last page, the financial statements for 2018, which I won't ask the CNAG to comment on, but you did say that there was a reduction in the figure for fixed assets from 51.5 to 29.4. What was that?
We did actually go through this earlier, Deputy. It's a highly technical accounting area. In short, we are rationalising our subsidiary companies. As part of that process, we had to get valuations on individual stadia. As part of our accounting policies, we operate a depreciated cost model rather than a market value model. And when you work it all through, in terms of our accounts, we had to take in the market value of stadia where there was a reduction, and where there was an increase in market value, such as Shelburne and Cork, I think there was an increase of 7.7 million. Our accounting policies didn't allow us to take that into account.
And did you change the model for?
No, again, under our accounting policies, we had to stay with our accepted model, and that's.
So within your accepted model, there was a change.
In terms of the valuations of the properties, the valuations went down, and we had to take that into account in our impairment analysis. So the CNAG confirmed earlier that he didn't disagree with the approach that was taken.
Right. Okay.
I didn't disagree with what you had said.
Sorry,
which is not the same thing. Yeah. But they were the same stadia. They were the same stadia the year before. You then valued them under the same model. And they were reduced under a depreciation model.
Yeah, and again, we can go into the accounting of it. The year before, the stadia would have been valued on the basis of the entire stadia network being the cash-generating unit. So we took them all as a basket of overall values. By going to the valuation of individual stadia. Overall cost, yeah.
No, there's a difference between cost and value.
So
which was the cost or value?
Cost, yeah.
Cost.
So by going to an individual stadia basis, well, then that changed how the valuations were done.
So you were overstating it before that?
Well, the book values overstated their market value or their value in use.
And would that have been the case in relation to Harold's Cross, for example? Would that have been valued differently if you had taken this new model?
Well, in the Harold's Cross, from memory, I think the value on the book value in our accounts was 6.3 million. Obviously, the market value of Harold's Cross was 23 million.
Well, it's what the department paid for it. Did it go on the open market?
No, and I think it's covered before. It was one state body to another, and there's a circular governing how that process.
So you valued it at 6.3 under that. Sorry.
No, our book value, we were carrying it at 6.3.
Right, and under this model, would that have meant that it was worth less or more?
Well, I can't say, because it wasn't part of the impairment analysis in 2018, because it was actually disposed.
And how many of the stadia in the impaired analysis report were worth more?
2 were worth more: Shelburne and Corriheen Park.
Where's the second one? Cork. Okay.
Cork.
And was there much of a difference?
The Shelburne was valued at I think 6.7 million higher than it is in the accounts, and Cork was valued at just under 1 million higher than it was is in the accounts.
So that suggests that you're carrying a lot of liabilities in terms of stadia around the country.
No, I don't think it has any bearing in relation to liabilities.
Right. Well, I mean, I'm saying they're not going to be adding to your value if they're making. Are they making a loss? You were saying if you weren't paying the prize fund, the running costs. Look, I'll leave it because I know it's a bit of valuation and it's a different.
The impairment issue and the running costs are completely separate.
Right, okay.
Just on this, because this has come up twice. As covered in the 2018 accounts, which have been audited but not yet published. So you can take it when they're laid before the Oireachtas in the near future, we will, at that point, because it'll be late before, seek a detailed note, stadium by stadium. We're just a little bit premature because the 18 accounts haven't been published. So, but we will specifically come to that when we get the accounts.
Yeah, there is an impairment note in each of the subsidiary financial statements as well. So I think a briefing note would probably be a useful thing for the committee.
But we will wait and follow the protocol
Yeah.
until the slate before the Oireachtas, and that will be shortly.
Yeah.
The impacts are certainly different for each of the stadia.
Do we get I'm sorry, Deputy, I'm only a second on this. Do we get the individual stadium accounts as well?
You do.
It's grand. And will they all come at the same time?
They should do.
Yeah, they will. So that'll come shortly.
The Incon report due to be published in September. Have you got a draft of that? And what's your indication of the time for that? As it was due for September, but obviously there's been slippage.
Yeah, at this point, I would hope we will see it by mid-October would be the timeline.
Mid-October?
Yeah.
Okay. And in relation to the possible sale of other tracks, is that something that is considered separately, or you were saying you were analysing the footprint? What is your thinking on that at this stage in terms of how it would, in terms of viability?
To the Chairman, the Board has no proposals or plans at this stage to sell any track or stadium. But I think when the Indicon report is delivered, it will be a matter for all parties to consider whatever the recommendations are. And I'm not privy to what those recommendations might be.
Right. Just you mentioned earlier about the income that you get. It's 16.8. It was 11.9 in 2010, if I'm right here reading this list. It reduced in 2011, 2012, 2013 and 2014, and it was at 10.8 million in 2014. Then it went to 13.6 million in 2015, 14.8 million in 2016, 16 million in 2017, stayed the same in 2018, and it increased in 2019. That's correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it has been increasing. Now, the betting tax is not a betting tax on just horse racing and on greyhounds. People bet on rugby and Gaelic and politics and everything else. It is the totality of. So there's only a small proportion of gambling that happens in terms of greyhound racing. Now, you talked about it being the cultural value. Now, I would suggest that there's equally, if not a greater cultural value in some of the other entities, like the like of the GAA and rugby or soccer or any range of sports. Sports Ireland receives 60 million a year to distribute among all of the sporting organisations. Now, I know that there is money paid under sports capital grants as well. Given that the subsidy that you get, it's extraordinarily large in proportion to your in relation to your total income. Your total income from both turnover from racing, if you leave out operating costs and tote and the money that's paid out in the tote and so on and so forth, and then if you look at the other incomes from prize money, sponsors, which is reducing, and media and other income, essentially it's 24.5 million in 2017. I'm correct, and 16 million in addition to that comes from the betting tax. That's an extraordinary balance. In actual fact, if you were to look at that kind of money, that would pay the total costs of free school books for every primary school in the country, for every child. I mean, it's an extraordinary amount of money that is going to one entity when you look at what's going to sports organisations in totality. Do you honestly think you can make the point that it's of such a cultural importance in the context of that?
Thanks, Deputy. To the Chair, just a couple of comments. I take the points in relation to the betting tax. The betting tax increased from 1% to 2% in 2019. I'm not sure what revenue accrues to greyhounds, but to our total operation and the fact that we have 9 meetings now being carried on the SIS platform, greyhound racing is now much more open to betting activity than it would have been heretofore. So there is an income from that area. What size it is, I can't say, but there is an income. On the wider issue, I mean, I'm not making the argument on the basis of cultural value of the industry. I would make the argument on the basis of economic, social and cultural value of the industry. And I would have referenced the Power report earlier on, which was done in November 2017 on the economic and financial significance of the industry. And the estimate in that report is it has an economic impact of 302 million. And I think the receipts from PAYE and PRSI alone from people involved in the industry were estimated at 32 million. So I take the point that's been made, but there is another side to it as well.
I think there could be a financial analysis done in relation to all of the sporting organisations, and would, in many cases, would be multiples of what you're talking about there. But just let me leave that there. In relation to I know greyhounds are not treated as dogs. They're treated as livestock, which puts them out of the gambit of the ISPCA. So there's an extra responsibility. Could I just ask, I hadn't realised that the Irish Coursing Club were the ones with that actually had control of the stud book. So which dogs do you have responsibility for rehoming? Is it ones that have raced, that are registered with yourselves? Is it all of the greyhounds that are born? How is that adjudicated on?
Well, as the Irish Greyhound Board, and soon to be renamed to Greyhound Racing Ireland, our remit is for racing greyhounds, so our responsibilities would be for racing greyhounds. So
you reckon how many dogs come into that? If you were to make an estimate of it?
Well, as I said earlier, our dog pools currently are probably around €3,800, so there's 3,800 racing greyhounds in the system currently.
And in terms of the amount of dogs that are born, do you dispute the figure in that report?
I don't think there's an issue with the number of dogs that are born, but it's as you move along the chain, the system doesn't track dogs who are retired. I mean, for example, you could have a dog retired on an owner's property. It doesn't show up as a greyhound racing greyhound, it doesn't show up as a coursing greyhound, it doesn't show up as having been exported, it doesn't show up as being deceased. And what would be the racing life of a dog? Average racing life would be 3 to 4 years, but I am aware of dogs that can run as late as 6 years, and right. we have introduced veteran and senior races to cater for that category. So essentially, the number that are born, the number that are each year, they could be. There's a proportion of those that go into greyhound racing every year. Mm-hmm. So there's a turnover. So if you were to do it over 3 or 4 years, that's a very large number that are born. There's a very small number of those in relation to the numbers that are racing, if it's about 3,500. Mm-hmm. So there's no obligation for you to have any welfare responsibility for the other greyhounds? On a statutory basis, no. And will there be after there's traceability? No, our traceability system will be focused on the racing greyhound, and that's what's provided for under the Greyhound Racing Act of 2019. So in terms of, would you discourage or would you agree that there's an excessive breeding of dogs? Again, they make very good pets now, and you know, I think that that doesn't mean, you know, that people can't have them as pets, but they're not the go-to. Yeah, but I think in many ways, and if you look at the breeding figures, the market manages breeding. Breeding has dropped by over 2,000 dogs in the last 3 years. So if there isn't an outlet for races or for some other purpose, the number of dogs being bred will reduce. Right. So there's most greyhounds that are bred won't come in under the welfare, the contributions to the greyhound welfare and Irish
Retired Greyhound Trust, the majority don't fall under that. Neither do they fall under the auspices of the ISPCA because they're not dogs, they're not classified as dogs. That would be the case.
Yeah, and again, I got back to the primary responsibility falls on the owner of any animal.
Yeah, and I mean, where we are the Public Accounts Committee, and this shouldn't be, animal welfare shouldn't be within our remit, but when you start looking at the impact of animal welfare on this sport, it is about the viability or the non-viability of the sport when there is a question of animal welfare. So I think that's why it's certainly coming up here. Just in relation to the payment of 115,996 that was made to the former CEO, was that who terminated the contract there?
Again, to the Chair, I think that was dealt with a previous Public Accounts Committee. I think the board at the time made a decision to advertise the position, which they were entitled to do, and on foot of that, discussions took place, and I think by mutual agreement the contract was terminated.
Right, and the subsequent, the interim CEO received fees as opposed to a salary. That's what it was described as. Why was that the case?
Again, it was an interim appointment, so it would appear it was done on the basis of employing a consultant rather than employing an employee, because it wasn't a long-term appointment. So
there wasn't a PAYE, PRSI. That was their own responsibility. Was the total fee.
It probably would have been subject to withholding tax. I'd need to check that, but it was paid as a consultant. It should be, yeah. Yeah.
Okay. And then has the amount remained the same, or is it, or has that increased?
The amount of which?
The CEO salary.
No, the CEO salary has remained the same since, I'd say, 7 or 8 years at this stage. It's set by the department, not by the board.
Right. And you said earlier about you're running morning meetings. So the big income the big income, it will be the same with horse racing as well. The big income comes from television and TV rights and more than from gate receipts. So it wouldn't matter what track you're running these meetings on. The feed is for television consumption. Would that be the case?
Well, it's for the betting market. I mean, the accounts you have before you, we were getting 800,000 from SIS. We would expect in 2019 that figure would be close to 2 million.
Right. So you're targeting that as an income.
Well, absolutely. It's a diversification of our income stream, and an important one.
Okay. Let me just. Okay.
Are you okay there?
Yeah, I think I've one or two more questions. Sorry.
As the deputy's looking, are we taking a break for witnesses?
Decide now when deputy is finished. If people want a short break.
Yeah, in relation to in relation to compliance and penalties, the Welfare of Greyhounds Act 2011. What are the fines that apply there, and who applies the fines? Where's the regulation on that?
We certainly apply the fines in relation to transfer of ownership, and the fine is €250. Other fines, I would say, are set by the court on the basis of whatever the offence might be. The court will decide what fine is appropriate.
Right. And €250, is that? Would you say that is sufficient to be a deterrent in some of the cases that you? And it's been a very small number of cases by the looks of it. Would those fines appear, for example, in your financial statement?
Yeah, I think they are commented on in the general commentary. Obviously, we would like for fine levels to be higher, but I would say the figure is set by regulation. I would need to check that, but I'd say it's a statutory figure.
But would that encourage you to go after, if there's a huge investment in maybe legal outlay, administrative time?
Yeah.
Is that prohibitive in terms of governance and regulation?
Yeah, your point is very valid. That yes, it is prohibitive in terms of the value of the fine.
And you had a very small number. Can you give us some sort of an idea of a very small number of fines in 2017? There were 3, totalling 1,250 were issued for offences. There's 4 this year. What would be typically the kind of they must be pretty serious if you go after them.
A number of the fines, and I say the majority of the fines, are in relation to failure to notify transfer of ownership. The more serious cases will be dealt with by direct prosecution, either by ourselves or by the Gardaí or by the Special Investigations Unit in the department. The reason for the reduction in the fines is that we operate under statute, and unless we can prove that the change of ownership took place within 12 months of the time we prosecute, it results that it's statute barred and we can't proceed. So I think as we build our traceability system, and even with our confidential phone line, the information available to us will vastly improve.
And you told us about the number of people who made contact on that confidential phone line. Have you dedicated people to deal with this particular aspect? And, you know, what has changed in terms of the level of work that goes into that? And is it the only way you're finding out about you know, where there are welfare issues, for example?
Just on the confidential line, that's checked on a daily basis, and anything that's reported on it is followed up immediately. But that's just one element of our welfare enforcement. I mean, we have a team of control stewards, stipendiary stewards, welfare officer, veterinary director, and we also have a group involving the Special Investigations Unit of the department and other parties, where there is an exchange of intelligence and information, and a lot of activity takes place in full of that.
Okay.